Welcome to the Jali Podcast. I'm your host, Melyssa Barrett. This podcast is for those who are interested in the conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Each week, I'll be interviewing a guest who has something special to share or is actively part of building solutions in the space. Let's get started. Welcome to the Jali Podcast, where we explore innovation, diversity, and resilience. Have you ever had a time in your life where you feel like you're doing more than one thing and you compartmentalize your life? For a while, I felt like there was always a challenge in bridging the things that I was doing together in my life. Am I consulting on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Am I focused on payment technology, credit risk, governance, privacy? Am I talking about economic development, digital equality, data, security, risk? Are we talking trust? Are we talking private sector, public sector, community engagement? And I feel like my life has come together and my worlds are now colliding. And then I had the pleasure of meeting Lawrence Eta, who literally wrote the book on Bridging Worlds, a journey of technology, leadership, and public service. I am so thrilled to welcome a global leader in digital transformation, Mr. Lawrence Eta, with over 23 years of experience, has shaped the future of smart cities and digitization. As Vice President of Digital and Analytics for a Saudi Arabian mega project and a Digital Government Advisory Board member, his work is driving technological innovation on a global scale. Previously, Lawrence served as Chief Technology Officer for the City of Toronto, where he championed a digital infrastructure strategy that prioritized innovation, equity, and inclusion. He's an international best-selling author of Bridging Worlds, a TEDx speaker, an award-winning technology executive with deep expertise in IoT, technical architecture, and business technology solutions. His impressive career is built on a solid educational foundation, including an executive MBA, a Master of Management, and a Bachelor of Science in Technology Management. His vision for digitizing cities and his commitment to inclusive policies make him a true pioneer in his field. I couldn't help but tell you about my feeling about bridging my own worlds, but I will let him tell you about his story and how he is literally bridging the world we live in today. I have this distinct pleasure. It truly is a pleasure to have Lawrence Eta on this week to talk about all things. You are such a master of so many different areas, but as we think about leadership, one of the things I usually start with is just talking about how you got to where you are today. Because I have to tell you, I have had such a joy in reading your book. It's called Bridging Worlds, a journey of technology, leadership, and public service. And it is definitely a must read for anybody that is in technology. I think you have such a masterful way of really articulating what people are feeling, kind of across the gamut from technology to diversity, equity, and inclusion to leadership. It's actually a fabulous read. But let's start off just talking about your journey because I was so impacted by you growing up and actually mediating between your parents and all of those things. So talk to me about how you even came to be where you are.
Well, first, thank you so much, Melissa. It's great to be on your podcast, your channel. Thank you for the opportunity, the space, and as well for all your accomplishments. Great in this forum to have these wonderful conversations. So I feel truly fortunate to be here for that. And thank you again for mentioning my book. When you write a book and you put yourself out in this way, in some ways, it's a reflection of your life as how it's been. So, a great amount of people contributed to make this happen, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Um, if we take it from the beginning, when lived in 5 countries: Nigeria, the United Kingdom, Canada, the U.S., and now in Saudi Arabia. If somebody had said to me as an 11-year-old boy, there would be an adventure through there, I may have sort of said, that's interesting, but that's how life has unfolded. And it really started from that early childhood, which was in many cases, we talk about transformation, which transformed my life in leaving home. And it all came about as highlighted, as you mentioned, as I specified in my book, my parents going through what many parents go through in terms of separation, divorce, and young children trying to find their path. And then all of a sudden, you are now moving to a foreign country. And that's how it started at 11 years old. I only spent a very short time in my birth country, lived there for 11 years, and I'm now in a boarding school, going to another part of the world, another continent, and trying to find yourself and belong and do that in such a young childhood. And what's really important from that, as I remember, is that when I got older, it was actually the effect I had to think about on my mother. Because at that time, when my parents were going through that divorce, and I don't know how an 11-year-old convinced their parents to create sort of peace, but they sort of agreed to say, okay, we'll send you to boarding school. Then one doesn't go to his father, one doesn't go to his mother, and we'll have some guardians. And I came up with this proposition at 11. I don't even know where it came from, but it just happened because what I really wanted, which really set the tone of who I am today, is that I wanted both parties to have peace.
Mm.
And I found the best way to do that was to ensure that nobody felt they'd lost, nobody felt they'd won. And that's probably the mediation the way that I've conducted my leadership in how do we find common ground. Maybe it's something that was just born in me, but it seemed the most obvious choice. And the next thing I'm learning how to tie a tie. The next thing I'm on a plane. The next thing I'm going with my mother to settle into school. But it had a profound impact on her, especially because when we think about it, children grow up so quickly. And if you think about it, a mother then doesn't live with her child, from 11 on, I'm seeing my father 1 week in the year when I visit back to Nigeria, and I'm seeing my mother 3 or 4 weeks of the year. So it had a profound impact on both of them. But for me, it was, oh, this is adventurous. And then it became, this is kind of lonely. And then it became, well, I better survive in this environment that suddenly I'm a majority. I leave a country and a continent where everybody looked like me. And then I arrived somewhere where I'm now a minority and dealing, as you can imagine, with all those cultural and racial and different issues at the age of 11 and in a boarding school that looked like Harry Potter in the middle of one of the coldest places I've been in my life. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's how the journey started.
Wow, and it's so interesting to me that you yourself at 11 said, "This is the path I want. I'm going to move here." And it feels like to me, after kind of digging into your book, that you started bridging worlds well before you even knew you were bridging worlds. And there's so much in your book that talks about, just the creation of inclusive and connected societies, and just how you found yourself in the minority, both in terms of cultural and kind of an unconventional path into your field of technology. So how did you make that journey from not only Nigeria to the UK, but the journey into technology?
Well, certainly. I mean, if you, as you may know, and your audience may know, Nigeria was a former British colony, so it was natural for us to, well, certain people who would travel to go to the UK, England. It wasn't uncommon because that was the group that we were associated with. That was the Western country we were associated with. But what became very evident to me is that once I then, as you said, I didn't know I was bridging world, I suddenly moved, etc. About 4 or 5 years later at 15, I kind of knew I wasn't coming back. The same way I knew I was leaving in terms of making this suggestion. An opportunity came. A close friend of mine had moved to the UK. My parents were in, as I said, this divorce period. I thought there was a win-win. But after 4 or 5 years, what really happens as a young person is that your biggest change if you move abroad to a whole new culture, a new environment is probably from the age of 11 to 16. If you move at 17, 18, you're pretty formed, you're getting formed as an adult, your accent is there, but my accent started to change. My mannerisms started to change. I was now with a whole group of experiences, playing different sports. I have a TEDx that talks about playing rugby and going through all of that sort of different change. So I knew about 15 that I'm probably not going to look to come back because I feel more in this environment of these formidable years between 11 and 15. And then the next step comes to, well, if that's the case, what do I do? Because my father expected me to come back. My father was very adamant that I should come back. And he was right to feel that. But I made the decision at 15, I wasn't going to come back. Again, another big decision. So now you've decided, you're a very brave young man. How are you going to survive? Because like any adult or any parent, decisions are made saying, here's your option. You come back and you will be supported. You don't come back, you're going to be on your own. So I made the decision that, yes, I would stay. And now at 16, 15, I'm thinking about, well, what is the career that I'm going to choose? Because you have to, you have to feed yourself. You have to sort of survive. And I left the guardians I was living with. So this was in the a period where in the sort of early 90s, when sort of computers were starting to come out, and I sort of talk about it in my book a little bit. So I thought, well, this industry seems interesting. This industry seemed something new. And I started taking night courses. I started taking some night courses in Microsoft Access, and it was just taking courses in the evening to sort of learn this. And then that led into me going into university education, undergraduate. I did a diploma, a high national diploma in business information technology. Then I did a Bachelor of Science in technology management. But the reason I chose these courses, even science as a Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Art, because again, it was about how am I going to survive? And I thought there were a lot of big Bachelor of Arts. I was even using data in terms of not even knowing it was data at the time, saying, well, I see a lot of people doing the Bachelor of Arts. So if I do a Bachelor of Science, I have a better probability of finding a job. And I think it was always with finding a job because
Right.
I've got to survive. So that's how I sort of, and I thought that would differentiate me. It will create value proposition. I would have leverage. And at the time, it was only Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and I thought I wasn't into programming. And then there was a new degree coming out called Management Information Systems, Technology Management, using technology to manage. There was systems analysis, there was human computer interface, there was all these aspects to the core that involved humans, that involves engagement with people. So I thought I like business. So I was going to do a Bachelor of Arts in business. I like business. There's this new computers, what you would call now design thinking, human computer thinking, all of that was still new. I thought, well, humans, I like conversation. So if I could bridge the two subject expertise, and maybe there's a new industry to conform. And that's how I came into this in terms of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me. I think that you found your kind of your purpose and direction so early. because I think a lot of people still struggle with where they're going and what they're doing. And you have all of these. I think one of the things that I have learned, and I haven't known you for long, but I feel like you operate in this realm of you're okay with being uncomfortable, right? And you have had lots of experiences where maybe you've never done this before, but you kind of boldly go into that space and own it. And it's amazing to me how your career has just transformed and has had the ability to impact citizens, people in cities that are that's just so amazing, especially you as a leader going through so much during the pandemic and your journey into Canada and all of those things. So what has been kind of the biggest challenge in terms of finding the right balance for you in terms of technology and kind of, I think I'll call it the human experience, when you think about all the interconnectedness of society?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think sometimes some people may be surprised that I'm probably a technologist which always starts on the human conversation because the technology part, not necessarily is easy, but it's the easiest conversation to start off with. What is the gadgets? What is the devices? What is the tech? And it's the most interesting piece sometimes to just lean to. And I found this new technology. But again, the degree that I chose and the part that I've always been interested is the human aspect. And so I found that some of the most challenging part was having to have the human conversation first in the industry with people that are like-minded, technical people, and then to be able to demonstrate that technology is only useful if it's solving human problems. It can be the most nicest, shiniest, beautiful, electronically greatest invention, but if humans aren't using it, then what's the point? Which comes into adoption. And then when you're in a public service, because I spent most of my career in private sector is about selling, you sell it, you profit, loss, you're trying to ensure you put a product. But what public sector really refines you, and I think that's how it found a calling for me, your business model isn't about profit and loss. Your business is about the citizens, the resident, the community, the benefits. You have stakeholders that have diverging interests. You have various groups that you must try to demonstrate that you can satisfy in wherever you're bringing the technology, data, anything else. But if you start that conversation with the human aspect, it, it brings you closer to be able to really say, I think I can serve, which is the essence of public service. So the most challenging aspects was sort of changing the paradigm. We've got to talk about the humans. We've got to talk about the people. Then we've got to get the people feeling trust in us, to have confidence in us that the technology we're suggesting or we are procuring, we are implementing will have the society benefit. And those benefits could be creating equitable internet access. It could be creating the viewpoint of making sure people's data are safe and secure. It could be ensuring that we are making economic benefits with the use of this technology, ensuring that people aren't being left behind. And that walk just resonated with me. It just became natural because what did it do? It took me back to my childhood of ensuring that I felt an opportunity where this career was giving me an opportunity to provide an equitable living in a way that it has done tremendous good for me. And I felt that some of the ways I feel about the industry and I feel about technology and I feel about the benefits on a positive side, I would just want people to feel like that. That for any profession they're in, and what a better way to do it than in public service.
Wow. I mean, my mind goes in so many different directions because I think one of the things we that you talk about is partnerships and kind of the bridge between public and private partnerships to create innovation that really democratizes the use of technology in a way that levels the playing field for many people that don't have a level playing field. And the leadership that you show, I mean, I think one of the quotes that I wrote down, I want to say it was from Chris Murray, and he talked about your leading change in Toronto and how you and your team set about rewriting the book on change management so that once thought impossible became possible. And I'm just in awe of how not only are you thinking about the technology and the people that you're serving as a public servant, but you're really talking about inclusive community. And in this day and time, we have a lot of people that are eliminating the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, first, I want to ask you about partnerships, public private partnerships, and then maybe we can roll into your thoughts about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you a story that really cemented how important that public-private partnership was. And a lot of this does surround about my time in Toronto, 2.9 million people, fourth largest city in North America in terms of Mexico, Canada, and the US. Very diverse population. So in the pandemic, we all know, we hope we don't relive that experience in our lifetime. But I used to go to events, not-for-profit events that you well know based on your background in the industry and then some of the leadership you're provided. And I was listening to somebody talk about the city of Toronto providing internet access. Now, when I was on this group, um, and it was a group of diverse people, they did not know my role in Toronto. They did not know I was the chief technology officer, but they were so happy. And I listened more in terms of without making it. And one of it was that I came to learn that affordability of high-speed internet was very heavy. And at the pandemic, you couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't do homeschooling. And they were so happy because the city of Toronto, in partnership with the private sector, telecommunications, and a technology provider, had provided them internet service. We'd actually installed in top of their building, their apartment building, some towers. We'd worked with the telecommunication industry. They'd done a great job to provide that access for a period of time. We'd set up all the equipment. We'd provide it. And the resident was just so happy. And I can tell you the feeling and I got where I felt she was giving me more was the fact of at the time, 10% of their income would go on internet service
Oh, wow.
based on the fact they were receiving government subsidies. So if we think about that, if 10% of your income has to go on internet service, then if you don't have that fund, you're going to make other decisions. And how can you now live in this world without being connected? You can't homeschool at the time. You can't purchase it online. You can't have entertainment. There's no real heavy quality of life. So we did that with the private sector. We did that with the private sector. A lot of people can go and check it out. We did that with a very important telecommunication provider. We walked together. We said, how can we serve? But that came from the leadership of our team. We sat down and said, how can we make impact? So that was one example. And another example was when in pandemic, as we all know, we didn't have a lot of time. Everybody had to sort of go and get entrenched at home. And you can imagine all the critical services that were now trying to get internet bandwidth. And based on the relationship I had with the private sector, we were able to prioritize the city of Toronto as an essential service so that we could be sort of first in line to ensure that the city still operated. Because at the time, the city had 44,000 employees, 10,000, 11,000 of those were office workers. And when we all left for the internet, when Chris Murray, the city manager, announced it, I remember very clearly in March of that year, everybody just picked up and left. And the worst Toronto had, it was a bad snow day where they could have 1,000 of that 11,000 people to work remotely. So myself and our team had to sit together. How do we now? We don't know where people are located. They're in homes. I had a good 800 positions who are now, I didn't even know where they were. And that formed some of the methodologies in my leadership that really helped me because I came with this principle of the 5 S's. Again, it was trying to focus on equitable services, ability to serve, and it came on the everything we do must be stable, everything we do must be able to scale, everything we do must have an integration of solution. That was the 3rd S. Everything we do must be sustainable using the cloud. Everything we do must be secure. And that became a rally cry for us. And then we use that methodology to work with the private sector. We're trying to ensure the city is stable and does not essentially fail at this time of crisis. We're trying to ensure that we can scale because we have residents that will need access to government. They can't come to City Hall anymore in person. So we need to be able to scale. We have to ensure that the solutions we put in place when this pandemic is over, it will be over. We are not creating all these technology silos, all these different technologies that can't talk or interact or interoperable with each other. We've got to make sure we protect the trust of the citizens by making sure it's secure, it's private. And then we've got to ensure we're working on infrastructure that we can use in the cloud and we can scale up, scale down, etc. But again, it was focused on the citizen and residents. And that became a methodology myself and the great people I worked with in my team became a rally call because I was always surrounding myself with people that said, what is the heart of the city? What is the heart of the people? And when you start that as the center, then you can bring the private sector on. In stages, you can bring academia on because you're all centered around the common goal, which is the people. And you can keep that as a focus, even though you have different business models.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's so powerful. Because I think there's so many cities struggling with the transformation of their city to a smart city or an intelligent infrastructure. And when you talk about the 5 S's, you know, I mean, anytime you are connecting, right, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so you also talk a little bit about open data and your view
Yeah.
about the ability for open data to be used in the public sense to provide transparency. I think in this day and age, there's so much data out there that there is a distrust, I think, certainly amongst many people when it comes to the security, the privacy. What advice can you give for cities that are maybe struggling with that transformation as they think about where they're going over the next 5 years? Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that was really interesting that I was able to experience was one of my colleagues. We started talking about what is the role of government. I mean, the role of government is for us to encourage the ecosystem. We can't do it all. So the first thing is humility. I think cities need to recognize that you need the ecosystem, you need the not-for-profits, you need the academia, as I've said, you need all these actors together in the same table, the same virtual table. But your role is to lead in the orchestration of that. And that leadership could be in policy, that leadership could be in creating an incubation, do R&D, research and development, testing. That leadership could be ensuring that you bring the public along, consultation, town halls. But there is a role, and you are the center because you represent, the city represents the public. And one of the things that I really found is that we did something called the Digital Infrastructure Strategic Framework. And it came about because there was a large tech company that had come to Toronto to look to make it a smart city in a very unique area in Toronto that was pristine. It was waterfront real estate. But the conversation did not start in terms of the citizens and residents. It largely started with the tech, and it was great. So when I became chief technology officer in 2019, in October the 1st in 2019, we started to say, instead of focus on the tech, we're going to actually have guiding principles, a strategic, a framework that the private sector and Toronto could engage in wanting to provide some of this new tech, wanting to ensure that when they're using the data, it's going to ensure it's secure and private. So we came with certain principles. The first thing was everything we're all doing in the ecosystem, we can all agree it's creating social, economic, and environmental benefit. It's trying to ensure that it's catering to the social good. It's trying to ensure we're creating jobs. It's trying to ensure that the environment is not being left behind. So that was the first. The next component was that we want to ensure it's equitable and inclusive, right? And then we said, okay, we want to ensure it's privacy, there's privacy and security. So we had this intellectual property. The city needs to own some of the intellectual property because it's taxpayers' dollars that are being used, right? We want to ensure we're promoting, in this case, democracy and transparency. So we came with these principles. And then we got our politicians, our council, and our mayors to adopt it unanimously, full vote.
Nice.
And then but before we did that, we brought the public into the conversations. We actually started in person, then the pandemic, then we went online. So everybody could see that there was a role for them. Everybody could see they had been consulted. Now, it takes time. Often the criticism government doesn't move fast. But again, I come to what is the business model? It sometimes has to move at a certain pace because you don't want parts of society to feel it's being done to them as opposed to be done with them.
Yes.
So to this day, the DISF, if the audience want to Google it, it's City of Toronto Digital Infrastructure Strategic Framework, was a very proud document done by my team. And we had actually changed the name from Smart City to Connected Community because we thought the name Smart City sometimes can focus very much on the technology. If you're a resident and you may not know the history of what smart city means, what does it mean? If I'm not a smart city, then what is the other word to smart? Well, it's not a very positive word that's going to make you feel included, right? So we changed it to we want to connect the city. And many cities now have changed intelligent cities, resilient cities, etc. So we thought for Toronto, we wanted to connect our people and we connected them around the digital infrastructure strategic framework. We connected around the 5S principles. We connected them about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We connected them about we are trying to ensure open data is to ensure we can grow social, economic, and environment. We're going to put data that is private and we've made sure that we've gone through the due diligence and we're going to let you create economic. If you can take that data and make a smart bin or a connected bin or any other new innovation, our role in government is to help facilitate that. As I said, we are the orchestras to bring that ecosystem. And that's the beauty of when you are in that role. And suddenly what we started to view is that our role isn't to be everything. Our role is to understand in there what we should be. And most people who have seen my leadership, I'm a big one on the RACI, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted and informed. So with my team, we were always very clear. What is the role of government? What is our responsibility as accountabilities to the people? So if we create these framework, we create these principles, we bring the private, public, academia, not-for-profit together, we facilitate dialogue, we deal with conflict, which is natural, but that conflict needs to provide productive, like where do we end on this? Then you create a much more livable city that everybody may not 100% agree with it, but everybody feels their voices, at least at some stage in the conversation, have been heard, considered, and reflected upon.
I love that. That's a master's class right there. I could go on and on about tech, I guess, and I definitely want to chat about artificial intelligence, but let me pivot to diversity, equity, and inclusion because you talk about that as kind of a pillar of your leadership in terms of how you lead, but not only how you lead, but really a strategic decision, in fact, for how you transform the gender gap or the digital divide or all of those things. Can you talk a little bit about, because I think there's a business case obviously out there for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we have a lot of folks that are basically saying we're eliminating chief diversity officers. We don't need to be focused on DEI. What do you say to folks that are thinking that way?
Well, through the forum and the platform I have now, it's a big topic. I post on LinkedIn, I post on various different forums. And when I became CTO, there was always this narrative about we can't find women in tech. And also, we can't find diversity in tech. And I just want to differentiate. There is gender in terms of equity, but there's also in terms of color and race in terms of equity.
Sure.
So the diversity, equity, inclusion, you can have diverse group, but it needs to be equitable, which means you're including different groups, whether it's Black, Indigenous, people of color. I just wanted to summarize that because sometimes there was this viewpoint is that, oh, we have a specific gender and that gender just looks in a certain way. Well, that's not really the DEI mandate. It needs to be a representation of our society. And in Toronto's case, we are one of the most diverse cities in North America. So if we only have people, even if one gender, who look the same, then that's a challenging conversation to say, how are we bringing in equitable technologies that service that? So I made a very strategic decision, which was said that is that, of course, people, we're going to look for the best candidate. We're going to make sure the candidate is the most qualified. That goes without a saying. I mean, that's just expected. But we're going to go into areas that are not traditionally done and look for a group of people that are women and women that represents that Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so I transformed it, and a lot of my leaders were women. They were women from various different cultural backgrounds. I had two deputies, deputy chief technology officer that run the architecture and portfolio delivery that was from Asia. I had a woman leader that was part of that was Black, and I had somebody who ran my office that was from another country in terms of India. And we had this richness. Also, we had people that were also part of the majority in various different roles. So it had a robust group. It just happened to the fact that it ended up being very strong on females. And because during the process of the interview process, they came across having the most human-centric empathy viewpoint, which was good for the public service, I felt, right? So they brought richness, they brought empathy, they brought strength, they brought technical, and some of those people would have not been looked at because the focus on the recruitment wouldn't be there. And I had some feedback. I had some feedback in various different feedback about what I was doing, but I was so adamant believing in it because at the end of the day, if we look at the actual data and you look at the private sector, tech founders that are women, women in terms of diversity, women who are running companies, the production in terms of the return on investment is very, very high. There's many examples, and we know women are there. Women are leaders in this forefront, and we need to be allies and champions for them. And I felt that I needed to be I was in a fortunate position, so I could be an ally. I could be a champion, especially with people coming from color in the balance. So I made it a part of my pillar, and the results were there to show. The
Yeah.
results were there to show. I mean, we did not lay anybody off in the pandemic. Those leaders, right up and down the organization, there was no layoff. We provided technology at rapid speed. We digitized Toronto in at least 60% of the services. We won awards. We accomplished a lot of things. So to say that certain viewpoints of having diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's move a lot of the qualitative. There was so much quantitative data to show that Toronto during that period was led by a combination of people, diverse people, in the majority and the minority. And there were people who in that DEI were in significant pressure and significant leadership roles. And they succeeded because the environment was created as a way of collaboration. And the evidence shows that when you have more women and more diverse women, you have more collaboration than when you don't have that level. So the rollback that's happening in certain parts in North America, which I've read, is unfortunate, but the data needs to be looked at. Were they supported? Do they have the budget? Are they reporting to the right area? Is their voices being championed? Are you created? You can't have a single individual that look only like themselves in a position of leadership. They don't have the allies and they don't have people who look like them who can resonate with certain cultural understanding of what they're experiencing. And then they're expected to put the rock all up on themselves. It wasn't going to happen in my leadership. And it just became a fundamental aspect. And I was willing to take whatever feedback that came and criticism because I felt that, you know what, I will be measured by what I delivered. And at the end of the day, you're not the one who has the accountability that's going in front of the elected official trying to explain why our internet service or why we're not getting people remote working. I have to sit there. And if I state that I need this leadership team, I'm going to hire this leadership team and measure me by the results and by the outcomes. So that's my very strong philosophy on this point, because at the end of the day, my some of the most impactful leaders in my life, both personally, professionally, have been women.
Yeah.
Have been women. From
Wow.
my mother to my wife to I have three sisters, you know, women. So why am I not going to celebrate by recognizing that and saying that I'm going to try to look and create an environment that gives them the opportunity? Because they come with the skills in there. It doesn't mean that if you're not a woman and you're not a diverse woman, you can't accomplish. But I just wanted to level the playing field to give opportunities because, as we know, the reason of BEI is that those opportunities don't come about that often. You need lived experience. And as a Black man who's gone through a process from a male standpoint, it is very difficult assuming some of these leadership positions. It takes tremendous energy, strength. I call it the PEST, PEST, the political, the economic, the social, the technology. And I speak about some of those things in my book, about some of the nuance of the relationships being in the boardroom, some of the sort of microaggressions that can be said that we experience as people who are from the BIPOC area. And I felt that that wasn't going to be part of my vision, organization, and leadership team, that we were going to have collaboration, cohesion, communication that was going to be providing it for the residents. And that to me is a fundamental belief in my leadership.
Wow, that's powerful. So powerful. So, and it's funny because what comes to mind, you talk about some of the subtleties in the room and how, many times you were invited to the room not because of your position, but because of the technology. But it struck me when you gave an example of somebody passing around cookies.
The cookie story, yeah, yes.
And
It seems to be the one that's resonated with a lot of people. I've had feedback in my book. Yes, yes.
yeah, well, it's so profound because it's something that's so simple, like passing a cookie, and then you kind of launch into the subtleties around it
Right.
based on the culture in that area. And it's kind of that profoundness of like, it's so simple, but it makes so much sense?
Yes. Often the most simple things are the ones that give you that aha moment. Aha.
Yeah.
So this is what this is really about.
Yes.
It's not about the cookie, and for our audience, please, if you read the book, you'll see what we're talking about. It's really about the subtleties. And at the time, I was a young person in that leadership role. In that moment of the meeting, and for the audience is there, it was in a very senior leadership meeting. A cookie was being passed around, as you do at that time. And it's still to this day, my health was very important as part of my lifestyle. So I was on a very stringent regime. I was doing at the time. So everything was about what I consumed in my body, and I refused the cookie. And I needed a colleague. And then I found that there was certain, my voice wasn't being as heard, my ideas didn't seem to be resonating. I wasn't really being part of the team. And my colleague had to take me aside after the meeting and said, essentially, you didn't take the cookie. And my reaction as a young, you know, senior person was, what's this got to do about the cookie? And then it became the aha moment. It's everything about the cookie because they felt that you essentially were saying that you're not going to make them feel comfortable. So I learned that even if I took the cookie and took a bite of the cookie, I didn't have to eat the whole cookie, but I had to signal to the fact that I'm one of you and we feel. And that in the pet is the S in the social nuance that I had to learn
Yeah.
in terms of the journey. And it became a very interesting point about the cookie story.
No, it was. I mean, I tell and I'm not going to give away the whole book because y'all have got to buy it. But even the DJ story, the cookie story, I mean, there's so many things that you reference that's so interesting to me. And you really kind of bring the stories into the life. And the Jali is all about storytelling. So, of course, I resonate with you so much based on all the different components that you talk about and the stories that you bring. So it's awesome. The other thing I wanted to ask you though, is about artificial intelligence. Because when we talk about AI, and we know that, jobs are being eliminated based on how we're transforming the uses of AI. But there, you talk a lot about a balanced skill set. You talk about the power of communication and empathy. What do you think? What advice can you provide when it comes to AI? Because right now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of regulation or framework or rules even about it. And we know that as people dive into AI, it can exacerbate some of the discriminatory practices based on the lack of representation in technology and in the data today.
Right. And absolutely, what you're speaking about is biased, right? In terms of how do we bias? First, I will start that if I take it back, when the internet was sort of coming around in the early 90s, 92, I'm showing my age now, and it's an industry that's very difficult to regulate. As we've seen, it moves at a pace. And AI has been around for many years. It's just the adoption of it through generative AI, the chatbots, the agents, the now call centers that you're speaking to a bot. Are you really speaking to a human? Over the past 12 months, 18 months, we've really seen that. So I think that there's two things. Government is obviously in a race. It takes government, moves at a certain pace, and that pace, by the time they write any aspect, it's already, shifted. But I think it comes with the fact of ensuring that the public feels that the government is surrounding himself with, again, the community, the academics, the private sector, the public sector, to form certain guidelines, principles that may lead into regulation, but the regulation can be agile and fluid so that from each of the private sector doesn't feel the regulation is stopping their growth in terms of creating economic opportunities. But essentially, it's not just a free for all whereby people aren't considering and showing certain aspects. For example, the language models that are being built, how are you demonstrating through your AI models that you are, where is the data being inputted from? Because with AI, it all starts in the data. Is it coming from certain pieces of data? Is that data verified? Is that metadata that doesn't essentially target a specific group? Is that ensuring that in certain social practice? I think that's the part that government need to educate the public to ask the questions and then create certain levers that government has to encourage, I use the word encourage, and then mandate that those things need to be demonstrated. And that's what we try to do in the digital infrastructure strategic framework I mentioned, where show us that your AIs are providing these principles. Show us that where the data that you're coming from is considering and not having bias. Show us that you're making sure that the models that you're created are able to learn, but also where is your quality assurance, verification? How are you there? And more importantly, the governance, the people who are governing the decisions being made, show us that there's a diverse group of people on that. Because if the people who are leading some of these transformational AI development in tech do not have diversity across themselves, well, they're only going to have a natural tunnel vision. So if you as an organization can show us you've checked some of these pieces, right? We don't need to get into the heavy piece of now stopping or banning you. But if you don't show us that piece, that's where the regulation is starting to say we're going to impose certain quality restrictions that you have to deal with. And often the dialogue is either them or us.
Mm.
What creates is that one group will say, well, you're holding us back. Another group will say, well, you're not putting things in place. Let's come in the middle because at the end of the day, AI is going nowhere. It's been proved. So if we all agree that it's there, that's how it's occurs. So there is natural fear, automation of jobs, retraining, reskilling, absolutely. But even just today, I responded to something on the African fintech. Fintech is an industry that I'm really interested in. The continent of Africa being my heritage of where I was born, Nigeria, and how it's very interesting. And they were talking about AI in this article I was reading on LinkedIn today that I commented that was talking about creating improved productivity, automation, etc. But you know what's really good in the next conversation is that if we have these jobs that are automated, etc., and we are reskilling, not reskilling, we're reskilling, we're now creating a knowledge workforce,
Yes.
which is what the workforce is. Do we really want people of a certain age group to be doing heavy manual labor? Can we keep that sustainable? No, we can't because the rest of the world are moving at a pace. So if we can now say, let's use these machines with artificial intelligence to take those repeated jobs, but let's create new industries. Let's innovate in new industries that we can now have that. Well, maybe we have a much more increase of wages. Maybe now we have much more increase of benefits because those organizations are creating more economic benefits. So the conversation should shift from being fearful to what is the opportunity that's going to be created. And if that opportunity can be balanced with government has a role, one of the criticism initially in Toronto is that where was the city government when this big tech was coming? We want a presence. But once we started leaning into, we are part of this conversation, we don't have to have all the answers, but we're going to bring all the ecosystem to define the principles, define the regulation, and it needs to be transparent. It cannot, the government can't have this behind some closed. They have to have a conversation with the public. And imagery is very important. The public needs to see the leaders are walking together. And sometimes we don't see that. All we see is that, well, here's this regulation, not knowing that there's been a lot of work behind the scene. There should be imagery that says we're working on this. Here's the principles. We seek public feedback. We're doing a draft. We're working with the private sector to achieve that. We're bringing all the best academics. We're going to release a version 1, and then we're going to build upon it. We recognize we don't want to kill jobs. We don't want to stop the growth. But at the same token, we have a society that's concerned. Let's have a series. Let's have a town hall. Let's engage it. And then that way the public feels you're part of it. Let's tell you how we are also looking. And one of the things I would really encourage is that we need to look across the world. So in 2019, I was asked to come to Dubai because in the city, I was working with the chief medical officer and the general manager of shelter and housing. And we were looking at how AI, this was in 2019. I was asked to speak, but we started to work in 2018, how AI could solve, specifically machine learning, could solve homelessness because we had all this data.
Mm-hmm.
So now when I arrived in Dubai, which is named as one of the happiest cities, what we often need to do, especially in the Western world, is learn from the best practice in other countries, in East, in Africa, And we generally are very enclosed because sometimes we think that we have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. So if we learn from how is the world, the rest of the world dealing with these privacy issues, dealing with these bias issues, we can bring some of those best practice incorporated into our culture, into our democracy, and see how we can then demonstrate it. And it would be great if a politician stood up and said, I've traveled to the East, I've traveled to the West, I've seen how it's used in this extreme, or I've seen how it's used without that extreme. And I think that we can find something in the middle ground that suits our community. And we're going to now get together a task force and we're going to release to the public every month how the walk is progressing. We're going to engage communities. That is dialogue. And that starts to hopefully build trust. And then it starts to say the people who are governing this community is a cross section, bipartisan, not from any stripe, not from any political affiliation, just want to ensure that they are there and their focus is about the public. And I think that to me, in a democratic system, in a Western system that I've spent most of my life, starts to help at least provide some confidence that AI is not going to overwhelm you, but AI is going to be part of the way that we are progressing as a futuristic world.
Wow. You are the master. I love it. I could go on and talking to you for hours. You
It's
are
a
just
pleasure.
truly speaking my language. I love it all. And I know you're doing wonderful things out there in Saudi Arabia. And they're moving at such quick pace over there.
Yeah.
So I pray that we continue to connect because you are such a leader, such a mentor. It's been my privilege to just have this conversation with you. And I do want to encourage people again to buy his book because it is kind of just a tap into his mind, not only about technology but leadership and really the skills. When you think about AI, the skills that people need, knowing we're launching into this fourth industrial revolution, and it's not just about the technology; it's about humans and kind of balancing the tech and the human aspects. So I just want to thank you, Lawrence. If you can let people know where to find you, that would be
Absolutely. And thank you again, Melyssa. This has been an enjoyable conversation. Just meeting you a few weeks ago, I feel like we've known each other a lifetime, and we will continue to collaborate in various different forums and fashion, right from you being in the West Coast to me being in the Middle East. But we find a way to be connected. So people can find me on LinkedIn, Lawrence Eta. You can also find me on Instagram, similar my name at Lawrence Eta, and also my website, lawrenceeta.com. And from there, you can join my newsletter. I post quite regularly in the week, just of all things tech. I have a newsletter called the Digital Bridge, that if you subscribe with your email, it sends it to you every 2 weeks. And then there is a forum that's you constant information. And I just want to share with the audience. So, and you can purchase my book on Amazon.com. And it will
awesome.
ship internationally. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is the brilliant mind. So I again thank you and just wish you nothing but blessings as you go forward and look forward to a continued collaboration and friendship. So thank you so
Thank
much
you so
for
much,
joining me.
Melyssa. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for joining me on the Jali Podcast. Please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. See you next week.